Welcome, everyone, in this time of coronavirus. Um, I've had some meetings with folks literally around the world about their coping and resources for coping with the coronavirus. And it's interesting to visit with people about both their immediate situations and then how they're coping with them and what they feel their resources are for dealing with their particular situation. Um, for most people, I'm finding it's actually not been too personally stressful. They've adjusted to sheltering in place pretty much, not going out very much, and even now wearing a face mask when they go out. I toyed with the idea of wearing my mask. It is not a physician's mask. I just made it out of an old towel, terry cloth towel. Um, so it has its own unique look, and I'm actually fairly happy with it. And I wore it. I had to go out today to do a little grocery shopping, so I had it out in public. Um, I actually went shopping at Walmart, which I don't usually do, but I needed some things that were there. And I was disappointed to find that the employees not only were not wearing masks, but didn't seem to care about it. And, I reminded them, well, I reminded one of them that who was kind of in charge of things that um, they risked exposure and thus risked exposing other people. Um, but so it was interesting to find people, maybe half the clientele that were in the store were wearing masks, which means the other half were not. And I had that sense that they were being just a little bit cavalier about it. This isn't going to get me. And, this thing is all overblown. And maybe even a little bit of the president isn't wearing one. Why should I? But as a former physician and a person very aware of the medical implications, as well as the economic ones, I certainly feel to encourage people to wear masks when they're out in public, wherever they are in the world. It seems like no place is really safe anymore. We've only in the past week or so had our first case of coronavirus infection here in Jefferson County, where I am located. And now we've had, I think, 3 diagnosed here. That's not an epidemic yet, but the measures that we are employing to mitigate and to contain the disease, I think, are effective, and hopefully we'll not see a major problem here in Jefferson County. This evening, I'm going to continue with our discussions about primordial feelings, how they block our ability to manifest what we want and to succeed in life, and their relationship to the chakra and the chakra system of energy within the body, the subtle energy system of the body. In our first webinar, we talked about fear and the first chakra. The first chakra is the root chakra. It's the basis of our functioning. Um, and we talked about how being unloved, unappreciated, and neglected affected the second chakra in the second webinar that we did in this topic. These primordial feelings that we're discussing, they're the feelings, and I'm repeating what I said in the other webinars. They feel like they belong to us. They feel like they're a part of us. They're like always present, maybe in the background, but they're always present, and we don't usually know where they came from. Sometimes we can point to, a relationship with parents or family or teachers, or even the community that we grew up in, various influences. But most of the time we can't find where those feelings came from. That makes it very difficult to work out if you're in counseling or with a psychologist. They may cheer you on and give you reassurance and show you the psychodynamics of the situation, but they don't really have anything to work with because there's no real event. There's no real cause that you can identify. Many of these feelings are actually brought in with us when we take on a body when we're born, And so we they're just existential. They're part of us. They're part of our existence and who we are. And it's really a difficult thing to work with them on the psychological level. It's much more easy to work with them on the energetic level, to actually deal with the energy of those feelings and give them a chance to transform, and thus, to become the energy of those feelings to become available, no longer blocking us, but to actually become available so that we can manifest what we want. So that's the basic theme of this series. We'll continue on again next month, and I'll describe that at the end of the presentation. I also need to explain that when I talk about the correspondences between feelings and the chakra, that they shouldn't be taken um, too precisely. These feelings influence each other and each other's chakra, so to speak, so that that energy is blending together, and the blocks and tangles of energy that exist at various levels, they continue um, to interact up and down the chakra system, from the base of the spine all the way up to the crown of the head. And so, and these things are particularly important. These primordial feelings are particularly influencing the lower chakra, the first, second, third, and of course the fourth chakra, which is an upper chakra, but it's the feeling chakra, it's the heart chakra. And so whatever feeling I'm talking about, it should not be thought of as just occurring in this place. And it's like, well, if I have a feeling in that place, then it must be this, it must be related to this kind of a primordial feeling. It doesn't work that way. We have to just take it as we see it, and understand that they're all interacting. It's all part of a circuitry within our body, which structures and governs our functioning. When there is fear in the first chakra, and it was almost added right away. And of course, it can be in the second, third, and fourth chakra. When there is fear in the first chakra, it creates chronic, or what psychologists call trait anxiety. So this isn't unknown in psychology. It's well understood, but it means that it's there all the time, and it makes us hesitate to shrink from doing what we want or what we need to do. It makes us procrastinate. But it's the fear part of it, that may dominate there in a person. Other components may be there as well, and we're going to talk about some of those today as part of this webinar. But it's that fear element that comes in there. It's like, I can't do that. It just catches you like that. It just stops you where you're going to go. Feelings of being unloved, unappreciated, and neglected tend to be in the third chakra, and they block us from receiving in life. They keep us from receiving, feeling that we don't deserve to have our needs met. Produces a very, very uncomfortable feeling, and this is a very, very common problem, and it affects almost everyone to some degree. It's so very, very common. And this is a thing that derives from the way we were parented. Also, of course, we can bring these feelings in, as I said before, but it derives mainly from the way we were parented, were our parents able to attend to us as we needed to be attended to? Were they able to love us and to understand us as we got older? Um, but when I say as we got older, that really does start from birth. Were they able to understand us and respond to us and nurture us as we needed to be nurtured? And that varies from individual to individual. Each baby, each child is different, and the parents have to adapt to that. Anybody who's had more than one child, even if they're twins, usually, even they know that every child is different. Every child has its own particular needs, its own style of functioning, its own personality, really. They come in with that. And then that gets shaped by their interaction with the parents. But if the parents are unable to understand or comprehend a child, either because of who that child is, or because the parents are too self-absorbed, perhaps depressed or frustrated in their lives, and maybe using substances to help them cope and that sort of thing. So they're just not as aware as they might be. Those kind of things can affect children very much, make them feel unloved, unappreciated. And so they grow up feeling that they can't receive stuff. They can't expect that their needs are going to be met. They don't feel they deserve them. Okay, that's what we covered pretty much in the first two webinars. Let's move on to this night's topic. We're going to talk about the feelings of guilt, shame, and self-doubt, which is inadequacy, unworthiness. And that relates mostly to the third chakra. Guilt is a feeling of responsibility or remorse for something we did that we believe was wrong, some offense, some crime, something that we think or believe, whether it's real or imagined, something we think or believe that we did that harmed somebody else. It could also be, it can happen that we feel guilty about harming ourselves if we did something that we figured was stupid or foolish. That same thing falls in there. So we can feel guilty about that. But it generally relates to others about something that I did. It's a nice little phrase to help you remember what guilt is. Guilt is about something that I did for which I feel, or I believe, that I deserve blame and for which I feel remorse. You can't feel guilty if you don't feel remorse, right? Or it's like saying you can't feel guilty if you can't feel guilty. If you don't have that, then it isn't there. It just isn't there. But most people have a capacity to feel guilt, and that's usually about things that they did to someone else. Shame is a feeling that arises from a self-judgment of ourselves that we've done something bad, what we call bad, something shameful or dishonorable, improper, even ridiculous, foolish. Shame relates to a sense of I am bad. So guilt is about I did something bad, and shame is about I am bad. I'm a bad person. Now, when you think about that for even a few seconds, most of us can realize that at some time we encountered adults, usually, or much older siblings, who used the term good and bad. And when they said bad, you are a bad person, you're a bad child, you did this, which could relate then to I did something bad, but then they say you're bad. And that creates a shame. My fondest memory, if you want to call it that, was of some of the first teachers that I had in grade school, in grammar school. And there was one I remember who really ruled by shaming the kids in her class. And she was very good at it. And she would impose her will through shame. I can even remember I think a ninth grade teacher who did the same thing. Ninth or 10th grade, I think it was. Yeah. 10th grade English teacher. Very powerful lady, old lady too. She had taught my mother. That's how old she was. I was the second generation, one, not the first of her second generation students. She taught for a very long time. She was a very good teacher in the sense that she really knew her subject and knew how to present it. Actually made it very interesting, and it was fun to be in her class. But her classroom discipline very much was a manner of shaming her students. And there was, of course, good measures of guilt thrown in there too for, shaming the old, for disturbing the old lady. So she laid it on really thick. Needless to say, her class was very orderly and very productive, actually. But she was an old school type teacher in an old school, and that's how she controlled that. And I tell that story just because I think so many people can relate to that experience when you were young. of being shamed either by your parents or your teachers or practically everybody, it seemed. Adults widely use guilt and shame to control people. In fact, guilt can even be used as a verb, to guilt somebody or guilting someone. So anyway, that's a fairly standard thing as part of growing up. And so most of us carry some measure of that, and that tends to wind up in the third chakra. Let me say just a little bit more about each of these feelings. Shame is highly correlated with addiction, eating disorders, depression, suicide, violence, aggression, and bullying. Isn't that interesting? Because those first things are things we do to ourselves. And then that last group of three are things that we do to other people. We take out our bad feeling about ourselves on other people. And so when you see somebody acting like that, you can be pretty certain that they hold within themselves a profound belief that they are bad. And so they're acting that out by dumping it on other people. There is a fear that people who are ashamed have that their failings and shortcomings are going to be revealed to others, or have actually already been revealed. And of course, one of the ways that teachers work is to do that in front of all the other students, right? They didn't take you aside and privately chastise you and make you feel like you're, this big. They do it right in the classroom. And so it's very humiliating when the teacher, reduces you to a little pile of jello on the floor and, in front of all of your classmates. And I'm sure you remember classmates who were very cocky, about it, particularly the guys, and particularly in the middle grades. Oh yeah, she doesn't bother me, So they play along with her a little bit, but they're basically protecting themselves by denying that. And then they may go out and bully some kid in the playground as a way of venting that frustration, that feeling that they had been put down by the teacher. This leads to some interesting gender differences, and I'm just going to touch on it. First of all, shame affects women more than men. Women feel, apparently, I'm told, that they have to be able to keep a home, work outside the home, cook meals, and the expression that I heard was make their significant other, their man, feel like a man. And that's a tremendous responsibility. And they try very hard and feel very bad. They feel very, very ashamed of themselves if they cannot pull that off, even though it's a highly unreasonable expectation to be able to do that all the time. For men, it's different. It's very simple. For men, it's not to be perceived as weak. As one man put it, the greatest pressure I have is not from other men, but from women. As he said, my girls, his wife and his daughters, would rather see him be killed on his horse, on his white stallion, the idea of, the knight on the white stallion, than to fall off his horse, which would be humiliating. So that was the difference. I thought that was a nice way of characterizing the difference in the way that shame may affect the self-image of men and women. So shame is related to addiction, eating disorders, depression, suicide, violence, aggression, and bullying. Guilt is inversely, or you might say negatively, correlated with those things. The ability to hold something we've done or failed to do up against who we want to be is uncomfortable, and it helps us learn and adapt so that we can be a better person. So the feeling of guilt can be helpful because included in guilt and the remorse that we feel with it is the understanding that we know what we did wrong. And so we can apologize for it, we can express remorse, and we can move on. And we can be a better person because we know, like, I shouldn't do that. You might say we clean up our act. But shame is more debilitating, more weakening to our system. And it's it's really epidemic in our culture. Shame thrives on secrecy, or keeping it secret what we've done wrong, what a bad person we are, on silence, and on judgment, our own judgment of ourselves, aided and abetted by other people's judgment of us or what we think they think of us. So secrecy, silence, and judgment are the allies of shame. And the antidote is in our feeling empathy, being able to know and appreciate what other people are feeling. The lack of empathy allows us to do terrible things. I won't name any names, but I'm sure you can think of people, and particularly public figures, who seem to act that way. Empathy is about me too. And that's where the name Me Too movement came from, is that sense of empathy. I also feel that way. I also have been through what you have been through. It happened to me too. We can cope with this together. And so Me Too is a very inclusive way of saying that we have empathy. We connect with other people. And so it's the antidote to shame. So guilt and shame involve a lot of self-judgment, turning on ourselves. We get a lot of help from outside, but we do it mainly to ourselves, looking at ourselves and finding ourselves responsible or irresponsible and dishonorable. Let's move on to self-doubt. It's the third of the feelings. It means ceaselessly, relentlessly questioning our adequacy and capability. Self-doubt is a very cruel feeling. It just eats away at us all the time. And it may have been something that we got from our experience with other people, but a lot of times it's just within us. It's just within us. We look at our lack of accomplishments, our failures, where we messed up, as people say these days, and we take that in and we say, I'm not capable. I can't do stuff. So we're not talking about the little stuff where, your boss says, take this load of produce that we have and drive 1,000 miles to deliver it in 10 hours. And you could say, I can't do that. That's not self-doubt, right? That's just dealing or assessing a situation objectively. We're talking about the self-doubt that is ceaseless and relentless and always present, so that whatever task we have to undertake, whatever it is we feel we're supposed to do or need to do, like pay our taxes and that sort of thing, or file our tax returns, I guess is what I'm saying. We have a hard time getting up to that. We just don't feel capable of that. And we may be afraid of it, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being ashamed of ourselves for either getting it in late or making a mistake and getting it wrong and getting, the thing back where the government says, you can't do it that way, and so, it's the same thing as getting a test paper back or a written paper back from your teacher. And it says, you missed the point here. You didn't get that right. So individually and together, these feelings are rooted in the third chakra. They're connected with the first and second chakra. And I also find energy in the navel area sometimes. Had a wonderful example of that with a client recently. We were actually working on problems. They had multiple problems in the urinary system, which is the system for cleaning the blood. One of the two systems for cleaning the blood, but it's very much involved in purification. I'm just going to read you a little bit of that. And my attention went to the navel, which actually surprised me, right? Because we're talking about the urinary system, and I figured, oh, we're going to be focused on the actual anatomy of the system, but that's not where my attention went. And I felt a tangled energy there, what we sometimes call an energy tangle, that felt sad and heavy, as if weighted down. And indeed, I had some sense that the energy that came out of it, instead of going up in the system and providing energy to be creative and expressive and do things, was just kind of leaking out and falling to the ground. And that could properly be called an energy leak. It also revealed that it felt inadequate and not good enough to succeed. And that was also one of the problems that the client had. They were aware of that. And so it seemed like this was where it was coming from. So I worked with this sad and heavy part, asking what it needed from me. And it was really reluctant to share anything. It just basically sat there. And I eventually asked what made it reluctant to reveal anything about itself, because it just didn't seem like it was going to do it. So I asked it. But my attention shifted to the solar plexus area. That's the upper abdomen. And I found a very hot and frustrated part of him there, part of my client, that showed itself to be very impatient with the sad, heavy part, because that part was methodical and imperfect. And this part wanted it was very demanding that it be perfect and very productive and that it always succeed. And so it was imposing itself on that sad part, weighing it down and making it feel inadequate. So I kept my attention on that, or I should say my attention was just stayed with that, because it wasn't really an intention on my part. My attention was on that part. My client asked if this part was related to his father, and I found that it was, but it wasn't his father. And what I shared with him, it wasn't his father's intention to make him feel so desirous of perfection, pardon me, that he would feel inadequate. And we sat with that for a while, and this helped that demanding part to relax and to lift itself off of the sad, inadequate part. And then the two parts seemed to work out a kind of a peaceful working collaboration. They were able to be functioning collectively together and were able to bring the energy then up through his system so that it would be available so he could be creative and successful. And then I noticed that the sad part was no longer disturbing the energy of my client's urinary system, leaving it free to be able to heal itself. It was no longer taking on that energy, that disturbed pattern. So I thought that was a very interesting example of how the feelings in these chakra literally create disease. And we're going to talk a lot more about how disease gets created in our webinar next month. So just to conclude, and we need to do that and move on to our group clearing session. Just to conclude, the third chakra is about belief systems and mental activity. It's the energy of the memes that define us and that shape our story of ourselves. We all tell ourselves something of a story about who we are. It doesn't go on all the time, but we have thoughts about, I'm this sort of person, I'm that sort of person. This is how I do things. This is how I want things. And those patterns of thinking are called memes. They're like little subroutines in our operating system. They are very much a part of who we are. They shape us enormously. So we come in with some of those, we acquire some of those, But that's the basis of when we say primordial feelings. These are the feelings that we hold and that guide and direct us, and they're just part of who we are. And if somebody asks you, you say, yeah, I'm a kind of nervous person. I worry a lot. I'm kind of afraid of things. Or I'm a person who feels kind of shy and weak in the heart, and I have trouble manifesting energy to be able to get things done. Or I feel a lot of guilt or shame or self-doubt. It's like whenever I try to do something, I just kind of, oh, I don't know if I can do that. I feel so badly about what I've done before. I don't feel like I'm a good person, that I can do things. I'm kind of a bad person that way. So that's how these things work together. A blocked third chakra forces us into a life of doing, of giving, and of hoping for reward. Those are compensatory behaviors that we engage in to make ourselves feel better because of all these bad feelings that we're holding. But they also make us procrastinate because we fear criticism. We fear our own self-doubt and guilt and shame and that which is inflicted upon us by others. And so obviously the main treatment of this on the level of thinking, on the level of feeling, is self-empathy. Self-empathy. We could all use another measure of self-empathy, I think. For this, the approach from Hawaii called Ho'oponopono is very, very valuable. Basically, it's a very simple system. I'm not going to try to teach it here, but I'll just tell you what it is. It has 4 sentences that are used. First of all, you say, I accept whatever it is that's going on. I just accept that it's there. Another way of saying is, I'm sorry. You say, I'm sorry. I feel badly. I'm sorry I did this. But I like the term accept because I don't want to introduce the concept of feeling guilty when I'm trying to get rid of a negative feeling. So I say, I accept it. Please forgive me. And sometimes we're forgiving ourselves or we're forgiving that part of us that has been feeling badly, or we're asking the part to forgive us for not having paid attention to it, for having tried to ignore it or suppress it or deny that it's there or push past it. And then we say, I love you. And the implication is I love you unconditionally, without any condition. I accept you as you are. That part of us, another person, the thing, whatever it is in our life, we accept it. And then finally, we conclude with, I am grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity to learn this lesson, to grow, to adapt, to change, so that I can be a better person. So I'm not a bad person anymore. Get rid of that shame. So I accept whatever it is. Please forgive me. I love you unconditionally, and I am grateful. So I'll conclude this segment with just a comment on what's coming next. The next webinar will either be May 5th or May 12th. I need to look more closely at the calendar and also at world events and the pandemic to decide just when we're going to do that. As much as I love having people here with me and makes me feel like I have an audience, I actually feel quite good relating to all of you out there in cyberspace this way with my green screen here behind me. And so we'll just see which date that works out. I'll let you know fairly soon about that. I'll send you a letter about the YouTube posting of this, and then I'll let you know what the date of that next webinar is going to be. But we're going to move on to the 4th chakra and the feelings associated there: rejection, loss, criticism, blame, disappointment, resentment, bitterness. These kind of really rough feelings that we hold mostly in our heart. And again, as you realize, all of these feelings have a connection to the heart. I'm going to break that down into the way I experience it, which is 3 levels. A lower level here at the base of the heart, a mid-level, the center of the heart, and then an upper level here at the top of the heart, at the upper part of the chest, and which of those feelings go with which parts and what the implications of all of that are. So that's what we'll be tackling next month, and I look forward to having all of you join me for that. So I'm going to end this recording now, and we'll move on into our group clearing session.